So as we look at the effects of frame size and muscling score, the larger the frame size, the higher the average daily gain, but the longer the feeding period required to reach a given degree of fatness, and the greater the live weight necessary to produce carcasses of a given grade. Okay? And then the higher the muscle score, the higher the yield grade, so the more red meat yield that they will have on that carcass, the greater the ribeye size, and the higher the muscle to bone ratio. So there's more muscle hanging on that carcass or the skeleton of that animal. We ended up, the USDA has 13 feeder grades. 12 are for thrifty animals, and there's 1 for inferior or unthrifty animals. And we'll show you some pictures of a couple of examples of those in a minute. And so we could have a large 1, 2, 3, and 4. So a large muscle score 1, 2, 3, and 4, all the way down to a small 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you'll notice on our market reports that you'll see that are turned out by our markets, you will see this terminology, a small number 1 or a large number 1 steer or heifer there. The other grades are the inferior grade. And it could be for this particular calf, as you can see, looks like it's stunted in growth. Rough hair coat, a little smaller in size there. Quite possibly could have been an orphan calf that was maybe bottle fed, or maybe was orphaned after it was a month or 2 months of age and just didn't have any milk thereafter. And so it was kind of stunted in its growth. It could be parasitism, could be sickness. There's something going on and would be unthriftiness there. Now again, there is a market for these calves, but they would be severely discounted. Another one of the inferior traits would be double muscling. In our traditional marketing channels, double-muscled cattle are going to be discounted pretty heavily from a tenderness and marbling perspective there. One thing that we talk about is breed types, and we've talked about the breeds of cattle and differences in price based off of breed, and a lot of it goes into what their potential productivity of down the road, how well that particular breed would perform in a feed yard. Also looking at what is the carcass quality of that animal going to be. Something that we have to think about in Texas is the amount of Brahman influence. Not that those cattle that have heavily Brahman influence won't do well in the feed yard or grade well. It's just when we get a lot of tropical adaptability in those cattle, it may limit where in the U.S. that we can feed those cattle because of colder weather conditions. And so it can limit the number of buyers that you're having. In Texas, we have a South Texas feed yard network that probably in the state of Texas feeds about 5% of our cattle. And so it's a more limited market. And so heavily Brahman influenced cattle will typically go south. Maybe during the summertime we could feed some a little farther north, but they would certainly have to come off feed before we got too cold. Another thing that impacts price, some people say color impacts price greatly. And I hear this saying all the time that they have to be black-hided cattle to really command a good price in the market. And that's really not true. Good cattle of any color are going to be right there at the market. And this was some studied by Troxel in 02 and 05, and it still holds fairly true today too. And he looked at color in dollars per hundredweight and yellow and white face, black and white face, black-hided and red-hided cattle. These price differential is based off the average there. And so the black-hided were $1.14 per hundredweight greater than the average. Yellow cattle, which would be Charolais influenced cattle, were $2 per hundredweight advantage. Not a big difference as long as the colors of those calves are solid color patterns. They're not all spotted up. Versus down at the bottom, you could see those cattle that we term spotted or striped. Those cattle are going to be discounted heavily. Some of that is because maybe they look like they appear to have some longhorn influence or dairy breeding in those cattle. But then there's also the consistent see of those cattle. Cattle that are more solid in their color type are going to look more uniform as a group as we begin to put them together. So I always tell producers to avoid the spots and stripes if you're marketing those cattle in our traditional market. If you're in a niche or specialty market, you can have them any color you want, whatever the buyer wants. But in your traditional marketing channels, the beef industry today, solid color pattern is extremely important there. And again, it could be black or it could be this gray calf. Solid color is extremely important. So what does the industry want in our feeder cattle? And so if I'm a rancher and I'm trying to produce calves to hit a specific market, and this would certainly be more of a Gulf Coast or southern market with some of these specs that we see right here. Quarter or less Bos Indicus or Brahman influence in those cattle. And if those cattle have quarter or less Brahman influence in them, they can go north or they can go south. And so it gives you some more markets. More markets means more buyers, means more competition, which helps you drive the price up there. At least a quarter British in those cattle, and that's so that those cattle will grade acceptable and at acceptable weights. Same way with no more than half continental genetics for the same reason, so that those cattle will grade and we can market them at acceptable weights. And then we throw in that last factor, no more than a quarter dairy or longhorn into the mix. Again, we've talked about those cattle. They're going to be lighter muscled. They're not going to have as much yield on the carcass as some of our other beef breeds there with that. So some things to think about there.